In every age, God raises people up to speak the truth to the world in a way that is currently relevant. Though our opinions should not be held with the same esteem as the biblical canon, we still carry the hope of Christ to the world. Our society has forgotten what it means to follow Christ. The bright lights of truth seekers are barely visible in the dim twilight of a post-Judeo-Christian society. We all see the darkness coming. All we can hope is to share the light that He has entrusted to us. This is Modern Apocrypha. Hi, I'm Jared.
Hi, I'm Greg.
And this is Modern Apocrypha.
Modern Apocrypha, just what is that?
Okay, Modern Apocrypha, the Apocrypha historically were a collection of writings that were considered important, even critical, but not at the same level as Scripture. So much so that the Apocrypha were often included with the Scripture in various publications of Bibles, notably the King James, for hundreds of years. So the Apocrypha is important writings that don't rise to the level of Scripture, you might say. And Modern Apocrypha would be, hopefully, we're talking about important things. That'd be the idea, right?
Indeed. We're building this podcast as a discussion of pop culture, modern writing, how it relates to historical writing, where we're at with current events, obviously lots of things going on in the world, and some of our personal business intertwined.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, knowing us, it's going to end up being kind of high-level discussion of why things are going on in the world as much as anything else. That's sort of our thing. Always has been.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
As we came through looking for the new name, trying to figure out what we'd call this, we knew we sat around talking quite a bit and just thought that would be a good fellowship and a good share for everyone that wanted to listen.
Yeah. Well, it didn't hurt that I had the URL either.
Oh, also true. How long have you had that particular URL?
Okay, so I've called my personal blog Modern Apocrypha for probably 12 or 15 years, and the URL I got probably 10 years ago. I approached a guy who owned it. He wasn't using it, hadn't been using it, and I asked him if I could buy it off of him, and he said, well, I don't need money, but how about you donate something to, and we figured out somebody I could donate to, and he signed the URL over to me. So that's how it worked out.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So.
Well, right on. Oh, I think our first order of business ought to be to discuss how we align in the world and how we have some modern apocrypha to bring to the world, in our opinions.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Modern apocrypha being positive works for the kingdom of Jesus Christ.
Or, yeah, I think that's a pretty good definition. Positive works, yeah, for the kingdom of Jesus Christ. Positive ideas to contribute to the modern world. That'd be a good way to put it.
Is it where we can find them, or
and
at least
goodness knows we need them.
Indeed.
So, for me, I've been a Christian since I can remember. I've felt the Holy Spirit living and talking with me and present with me since I was like 5, at least. So. Now, that it hasn't been an easy road, it hasn't been a straight road, and I'm sure as time goes on we'll get into that some, but...
Well, and I suppose we should start with a bit of an introduction, Jared. I know you very well. You've been my good friend. I'd say my best friend for years now.
Yeah.
But for those that might just tune in and just find you for the first time, how old are you? We're both here in America. I don't believe specifics are generally a good idea, but here in America, in conservative mountains.
Well, in my case, figuring out where I live to within a few miles is actually really, really easy, because if you know what you're doing online, that isn't that hard to do. But reality is, we're both here in America. I'm late 30s, 38 years old. I have 6 kids, and I've been in.
Hooray!
You know, that is such a rare thing these days. I never expected when I was young, just growing up, when we were both in college or whatever, I never expected our generation to not have a lot of kids. It just never occurred to me. And I never expected to have what most people would consider a lot of kids. But so it goes, that's life.
Sure, sure. And myself, I'm 44. Oh gosh, I used to describe myself as having moved 54 times by the time I was 19. I bounced around a huge amount growing up. I held a personal connection to Jesus Christ, but I've had a wildly nomadic stay in many churches. Having moved so much, and just turbulence in the home, and the things that happen. I believe we've met going on 18 years now. 18 years we've known each other.
Let's see, it would have been, yeah, that sounds about right. About 18
and,
years.
and I'd say that my walk is very private and even hidden. This country hasn't been the most kind and open to expressing your goodwill and love for Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
One man's love does not mean another, animosity towards any particular person, but that has been a perception that I've had to deal with. And I'd say that I have not been surprised terribly by the reduced birth rates. A lot of the friendships and acquaintances, business partnerships, I noticed that the average expectation is sort of a 2-to-1 parent to child. It's difficult to maintain all of modernity, is the word that people use, but it's hard to give yourself all of the temptations of the world and still take care of a large number of children.
That's absolutely true.
And as children goes, I am married myself. I have 2 children. Mine are much older, teenagers. Mostly out of the house now.
Yeah, and mine are just heading into that teenage phase. So sort of in those.
Turbulence.
Yeah, sort of in those. And then, yeah. I don't know. Do you want to get into the other thing that sort of motivated us to get started on doing this podcast?
Please.
Okay, so I wrote a book. It started about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. Started writing a book, and then June of 2022.
And what's the name of your book?
It's the name of the book is Bright Star, and I actually don't have a copy on my desk right now.
I do. This is
So-
Bright Star.
He's showing a copy of my book. That's perfect.
Very good book.
Thank you, Greg. But yeah, and so started that in 2022, and started it in January. Got started seriously in June after I ended up quitting my job for unrelated reasons. Wrote the book. Took about 6 months to get all the way through that book and the next one, but I wrote them as one book because I thought it was supposed to be that long, and then the publisher told me, well, young adult books are half as long, so I ended up splitting it in half.
And we should stop there.
Yeah.
Looking at this particular title, Bright Star, it is a part of a general overall universe, right? You've got more stories that may be a part of this particular series or another series that are all going to be a part of the same general universe.
That's right.
And
That's right. Well, and
the initial,
yeah, go ahead.
The initial story that over the last 12, 18 months that has been written was initially a book 1 of many, and even that was too detailed, too much to try to fit into one novel.
Yeah, that's right. So that book, what is now Bright Star, is the first of 4 or 5 books in the Epimyth, which the Epimyth is the core series for the Energemetra 6 universe.
Okay.
And since we're talking about it, we should probably give a little bit of background. The idea here is that in this modern world with all the stuff that's going on, the things that motivate society and that motivate us, often it gets a little clouded, but we look to the heroes of stories, the heroes of the past, the examples that come down to us from whatever place as a motivating force for our lives. And that was very heavy on my mind as I was writing this. That was a big part of what went into the back end of this thing. And the spiel I often give is politics is downstream of culture, culture is downstream of faith, and myth lives between faith and culture. It points back to the faith that we stand on and forward to lead the way for the culture.
And these stories, as they're presented, are going to be, I don't know, how would you decide who you would promote it for? I mean, I enjoy them, and I'm an older gentleman, but they would be appropriate down to, say, what would be the lowest reading level that would be an acceptable, like, hey, this would be okay for you.
Well, my 12-year-old daughter likes them. So
Okay.
I would say much younger than 12, and it's you start to lose you don't quite have the comprehension. You know, my 8-year-old doesn't really appreciate it yet. My 12-year-old does. I could see as young as 10, but really, I wrote the book for any audience, any age, and I didn't include anything in there that I thought would make the book unfit for children. It deals with life and all of the things that we deal with difficulties and troubles and stuff, but I didn't include any adult content because I didn't want to make it so that you couldn't give it to kids. And so many people are doing that. So many people are making it so that you can't give their work to kids because they include some kind of adult content. And I didn't want to do
The,
that.
these days, you're not sure that you can just have cable news on in front of your children.
Oh, talk about not sure. I'm pretty sure I don't want my kids watching cable news. We've never had cable news.
Well, just to have it in front of them, not even to allow them to watch it, just to
Yeah,
have
fair
them be in
enough.
the
But
yeah.
again, your point's well taken. No
Yeah.
argument.
But so this universe, this body of work is big topics that are suitable for all ages, but it presented in a way that you could read it to your kids and not be worried about the next page presenting something that was going to be offensive.
Right. Right. Well, and I guess the way I would put it is I wrote it for me. I wrote it for someone who is exploring life, who's an adult, but I wrote it to be suitable to read to kids as well. And hopefully, if my kids read it now, then come back and read it in 5 years, they'll take something more out of it then than they did today. Right? That's
Ever,
the hope.
yeah, every great story should have depth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly the concept of being able to fade to black is there, but if you write a good story, then there's nothing to fade.
That's right. Well, and you know, getting into that a little bit, there is a place to talk about adult topics. There is even a place to talk to kids about adult topics, provided you're their parent or you have their parents' permission and the setting is appropriate. But generally just throwing that stuff into our stories to me doesn't seem appropriate. It's like if that's your purpose, fine. Write that in a story as your purpose. But in general, don't just put it there for the sake of making it an adult novel. That's
Well, and something that I've noticed throughout some of the pop culture growing up in this era,
mm-hmm.
we tend to exalt the bad guy, if that's exactly the right way to put it.
Oh, that is exactly the right way to put it.
And so you wouldn't find that in this universe where the bad guy wins or the bad guy is presented as the ally.
No, you wouldn't. And that's actually something I think you say that and that's sort of a it isn't exactly a rabbit trail, but it's a perfect segue into why our myth is dead today, why our myth is such a problem today. And what I mean by that is when you read something like the Lord of the Rings stories, there is this super, super clear delineation between good and evil. And even in cases like Grima Wormtongue and the I can't remember the name of the king, but the king that he was speaking in his ear that he was, there is this thing where evil does seduce people, and you can point that out in a story. You can paint the picture without being an apologist for evil, without being an ally of evil. This clear delineation between light and darkness is something that we lost it on purpose at first because people thought it was interesting, but we've lost it, and we've lost it as a society, and it's not interesting anymore. You know what I'm saying?
We have, we have a sort of cognitive dissonance in the way that we do things, where we want to take one part of a story and apply it to a different part, and then jump to the end of another story and try to skip the necessary work and consequence.
Well, and just losing sight of the fact that there is such a thing as good and evil, that those are real things, and that they affect the world and they affect us. And when we aspire to good, it changes the way we approach our lives. It makes us. There is such a thing as living an admirable life. That's a real thing, and it matters. And we've lost it.
Well, and even the ability to recognize it and have a certain respect for your characters, if you will, allows a writer to provide good story writing, because you're not trying to put across a point. You're displaying a full character, a full three-dimensional character, as it was described when I went to school. That it's not a two-dimensional character. It's not flat because it has humanity. It has a full perspective, right? It's not necessarily good or evil, but good and evil are within perspective appropriately within the story.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. That good and evil are both real forces that are present in the world, and they affect the characters. And
Having a respect for your characters.
Yeah.
I don't believe that many of the popular writers, the Tolkiens, the C.S. Lewis's, I'd say Lucas, the people that have got large, broad worlds, could let go of those worlds. They are the way they are because that's a reality for that writer.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thing about a well thought writer.
Yeah.
And I feel that when you're just pandering, when you're just trying to hit the nut, these bullet points for what's the word I'm looking for? When they do the screenings and the viewings,
right? You're trying to draw in an audience at the expense of the world and the characters. That's sort of what you're saying,
as opposed to just displaying the world and the characters.
Yeah.
And if you've got a real world and a fleshed out world more than a real world, it supports itself and it doesn't allow bad storytelling.
That's right. No, that's absolutely right. And when I'm writing, looking at each of the characters and asking myself in every single scene, would this character actually do this? Is this something this character would actually do? If not, you can't do it, because as you say, that isn't respecting the character. That's trying to accomplish something in the story at the expense of the reality of the character, and that doesn't work. So
it really doesn't.
I'm with you.
It tends to damage the story right away.
It does.
So with Bright Star, the cover's not terribly descriptive. This is a young man standing on a skyline looking up at the stars. What genre is this? What should people expect out of Bright Star?
So this is a science fiction story.
Okay.
The premise of the story, very briefly, is that there is a young man from our world, a boy of almost teenage years, right at beginning teenage years, who is autistic, and his life is pretty dreadful. And he's transported from our world into an alternate universe that's built on an energy that is almost magical. It's an amazing energy field that people can manipulate.
I'm hearing a couple of genres sort of mixed in here.
Okay.
Is it one of those Death Reborn spiels, like they call them isekais? Is it Star Wars-esque, where it's all space battles? What is the style?
You would probably be thinking Star Wars-ish, but you're also going to catch hints of like Narnia, Chronicles of Narnia. You're going to catch hints of, what would I say? I read a lot of Robert Heinlein. I read Asimov. I read, heck, as a kid, I remember reading Tom Swift, and the sort of the little engineering thing for young guys that they did in those stories was sort of fun. So you're going to catch hints of all sorts of things going through it. But if you were looking for the feel of the thing, you would say Narnia for the post Star Wars generation, something like that.
Okay, okay. Something spaceships and other planets, not dragons and horses.
Something like that. Although the dragons, we'll have to see. That could make an appearance.
There's always a dragon to conquer.
Right. Well, exactly. And actually, the dragons are all the good guys in modern books, which is sort of profound, actually, when you think about it. Think about a modern book. See if you can think of a modern book that has a dragon as the villain. Because that's really hard to do. There aren't a whole lot of modern books that have the dragon as a villain.
There really have not been a large number.
Now, let's pull that to a scriptural context. Let's pull that to the Bible. Who's the villain? It's the dragon. Who's the villain in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit? There are dragons, and they're not good guys. And it's a really interesting commentary on modern society that we don't have books where dragons are the villains. It's sort of one of those Freudian slips that the enemy makes, right?
Sure. Yeah, the depiction of dragons, if anything, animalistic, and if nothing else, positive.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's absolutely right. It's sort of like our view of nature now.
And almost no mention whatsoever of serpent. And almost no mention whatsoever of serpents.
Yep. Well, and that sort of plays into what we're talking about. And I actually think that was a really great point to hit in our first podcast because, man, if you could talk about something that mythologically represents where we're at in the modern world almost perfectly, it's the fact that we've lost our view of dragons as the enemy and they have become the good guys. That should tell you where society's heading.
You know, and I would put it even deeper than that. They've become a pure symbol of strength and putting strength above anything important.
And boy, isn't there truth in that. And, that's actually power, especially. Let's, pulling that to power, not just strength. Strength has a positive connotation, but
That's fair.
In this context, I think power for its own sake is sort of where you were going there. Am I right? And and one of the things that I dealt with in Brightstar was power for its own sake and people who have a worldview that really is monomaniacally focused on power and what that creates and how it blinds them to all of the other important things in life. That was something I sort of explored a little bit. So
it is an important thing to be discovering throughout our mythology. Just it's not something to I guess the cliche statement is never forget. And you're always reminded, you're always at battle. If you forget what the dragon is, then it's won.
That's right. Absolutely right. So along those lines also, I know you wanted to talk about let's actually cover it. So for the sake of listeners, this podcast is actually made possible by and sponsored by Energemetra 6, the world. And if you're interested, there are copies of Brightstar that are both on sale and available for book launch team. Right now, I'm really trying to build a book launch team. I need more people who are interested in getting a free copy of Brightstar and posting on social media and posting some reviews. Not asking a lot of people, but that's something I'm really looking for right now. And so if you go to e6universe.com or energemetra6.com, if you can spell it, which you probably can't, and that's fine, but e6universe.com will get you there. And
e6universe.com.
Thank you. And you can pick up a copy of the book there. And along those lines, you should use the promo code Israel. And so, Greg, why don't you talk a little bit about why you chose that promo code?
Well, certainly, certainly. We had in our mind what to name the podcast, what to name this little project that we're doing. We knew that we would be getting together to speak. Um, Given our general worldview, we spend quite a bit of time in the Word, in the, oh gosh, would you say NIV Bible?
In the
Am I off my
scriptures, I
rocker?
would just call it scriptures. I don't have a particular
Fair.
translation. I use
I
several of
don't.
them. So,
And I have a particular fondness with Inspector Puerto reading the Bible directly to me on YouTube.
yes,
but
okay.
but nonetheless, we're immersed constantly. So we have certainly a particular worldview that would encourage standing with Israel on um, their current battles. But this was not at all to do with that. This was just looking for a new name, wrestling with God in our own lives, and that that's pretty much where it came from. We're not directly tied or taking advantage of current world events.
No, actually, yeah. But so yeah, if you're interested in supporting us, or if you're interested in Brightstar, head over to
Check,
e6universe.com, and promo code Israel will get you 10% off on the book.
and that would help us a lot to track who's seeing this, who's seeing the other
Right.
advertisements we've got out there, and at
That's
what
yeah.
times.
Yeah, well, and 10% off is nothing to sneeze at. That's every little bit, right? So,
Every little bit. And then, as far as this particular site, these are direct sales from the author.
yeah.
They're due to come out via the general system. What
And
date is
April 16th is when of 2024 is when it's set to appear in bookstores. So, if you're after that, you can go to wherever you buy books and you can get it. I'm still sort of in talks with the publisher about getting an audiobook version done. They say, "Oh, you shouldn't do that because you have to have a particular what goes into an audiobook is really particular and really specific." So one of the guys I talked to at the publisher, said that he's had people ask him to read their audiobooks, and he says no, he won't do it because it's just too demanding. And I'm like, well, that's okay, I'll do it. I want to read the audiobook. So we'll see where
Yeah.
that goes. One way or another, I'm going to get audiobook content out there for people.
All right. Well, I think that we should certainly save the audiobook discussion for another podcast. That's a broader discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. In this, I certainly want to touch on energemetra6.com. Please come by. Please come visit. Use discount code Israel. Get yourself a discount and let us know that you saw this, and it's a good way to reach out. Get back to us. What's a good way for people to reach out and let them know that they would like to be a part of your beta reader group? Is that also on
Yeah,
Energemetra
that's
6?
that's on that's on energemetra6.com, e6universe.com. There are two separate links, should be right there on the front page. Buy a book or join the book launch team. Either one should be right there. Anyway, leaving the book aside now, talking about myth in general and the Energemetra 6 universe in general, if you don't mind.
Please.
My intent with this whole story was to create a myth that points back to the true myth of Jesus Christ. The thing that is at the root of Western civilization is the Judeo-Christian worldview, is Jesus Christ as the hero. And what he did was sort of amazing, in that it's only in Judeo-Christian societies that you see the individual brought to prominence, brought to the center stage. And I think that's what made America great, was the focus on the individual being the primary force in society, and letting the individual do great things, allowing the individual to do all the things that we've seen in America come out of that. So we've lost focus on it, and so that was sort of the central focus of when I was writing this. That was one of the things I was looking at, and as well as the whole creating clean stories, and that anybody can enjoy, and good stories. I heard somebody say some time back that your license to preach is slightly less than your ability to tell a good story. And I'm not trying to preach, but at the same time, I keep that in mind every time I write, that whatever message I want to tell people, it can only be there to a lesser degree than the story is entertaining and enjoyable.
That's fair.
Yeah, well, and how often do we see that not followed lately? In the modern day, how often do we see people preaching off the pages of their fiction?
Nonstop, almost nothing but.
Right.
And so blatantly that you can't enjoy a story past the preaching.
That's exactly right. And just keeping in mind for me that's not the goal. It's like Martin Luther said, if you're a Christian shoemaker, it doesn't mean you put little crosses on the shoes you make. It means that you make the best possible shoes you can, because that's how you show the beauty that God has put into the world, the goodness that God has put into the world. You create a good product. And I firmly believe that.
Absolutely, absolutely. The individual responsibility to each of our actions, each of our products, our outputs.
Yeah.
If that's ignored and you expect to get beat down from above, you're waiting for the government to tell you how to do it. We're waiting on regulations for AI because we can't do it ourselves. All the external
Yeah.
expectation as opposed to an internal expectation. You've got to let that win over in yourself, and demand, beg, pray for Jesus to assist and carry you through what you cannot do yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So you want to take a short break here?
I think now would be a great time for a restroom break. I need to check on my dog as well.
All right. Well, we'll be back in a minute.
Be back in a moment.
Modern Apocrypha is brought to you by Energemetress 6 and the new book Bright Star by Jared Michaud, that's me, coming out in April 2024. If you're interested, head over to e6universe.com to join our book launch team for a free copy, or to buy a copy with the promo code Israel for 10% off. Modern Apocrypha is also brought to you by North Arrow Coffee. Now, I don't drink coffee, but North Arrow Coffee is the coffee company that's so good that even those of us who don't drink coffee love it. It's a pro-life coffee company. 15% of every purchase goes toward a pro-life cause. You can see right on their website what those causes are and where they're spending that money. If you use the promo code E6, you get 10% off on your order. And thank you. Now back to our show. And welcome back. We're back from our little break. So we were talking a little bit during the break about what we want to touch on here. And I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I certainly got to speak my piece about the Israeli-Gaza conflict. The world is a bit of a shambles. Of course, I stand with Israel. You stand with Israel.
Yeah, well,
but
definitely.
As the conflict goes, there's a broad way to look at that conflict and sort of topics in the world, and we thought we'd look at the way to look at that.
Yeah.
Would you speak a little bit about the Israeli-Gaza conflict on the surface for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, everybody, this is world news, right? And this is kind of how we break it down. The Israeli-Gaza conflict is probably the prominent world news item, and everybody has an opinion on it. Everybody thinks that they know what side of that issue that they ought to be standing on. I'm actually following on Twitter people who are on three different sides of this thing. Okay, so the first side would be we stand with Israel, anything for Israel. Israel is our greatest ally, right? So there's that. Then there's on the opposite side, there's Israel are monsters and they're oppressing the people of Gaza who live in an open air prison. And I actually follow a couple of people on Twitter who are like that. Kind of interesting. And then in the middle, you've got the people who say not a single tax dollar from America should be going anywhere but America. And Israel isn't our ally and they haven't done anything for us. And why do we care? So there's three different places you can fall on that. And that's kind of on the surface level, right? And then, so that's one level of analysis. Then you can go to a deeper level of analysis. I don't know. You want to stop there?
Oh, sure. The surface level, sort of today, what's happening in the world, something physical happened, that surface level.
Yeah, that's right. So then you can go to a deeper level of analysis and you can look at things like why all of this has happened. So, for example, it is just a fact that Israel created Hamas. They did it as sort of to try to create a counterweight to the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Yasser Arafat, who were sort of left-leaning Islamists back starting, I think, in the 70s, though I'm not real familiar with this. It's just commonly known history that they did this. And so what they managed to do is they created a monster. Hamas was created by Israel. And then at the same time, you've got all of the... So that's part of the political landscape that's behind this. And some people would say, well, that makes it... Huh?
Call that sort of a political geographical layer.
Right. So you can get a little more in depth than just the surface level. And that's sort of a little bit more of an in-depth analysis, but it's still just fact.
I would add one more.
Yeah.
So you've got the surface, and then you've got the political, geographical, monetary level.
Okay. Yep.
The reason why on some physical level.
That's absolutely right. And looking deeper than most people do, right, when you're getting into those things. Because, like it or not, the world's messy, and these things are not straightforward or simple. It's like I got into a conversation about the whole Ukraine thing when that started happening with a friend who's almost triumphantly says to me, aha, so you at least agree with me that Putin is an evil dictator invader and it's a one-sided war, right? And I'm like, no. We need to look at this a little deeper. There's a deeper level of analysis to understand what's actually going on in that region of the world. It isn't that simple. It's
very complex. Yeah, very complex.
No, it's a very complex situation. That isn't to say that Putin should have invaded Ukraine. Obviously, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that the facts are never simple. And anybody who thinks the facts are simple is they either have an agenda or they're a moron. It's one or the other.
Sure. Well, or simply ignorant about the particular topic.
You and I disagree on that one. If
generally most people will look at the next layer that we'll discuss, and their motivations for everything they do actually, in reality, fall into the last layer of detail. They explain after the fact how they got where they are, but how they actually got there tends to be on a spiritual level.
That's absolutely right. And that's like 2 layers deeper, right? Because under all of the physical causes, whether it's monetary or political or whatever, you've also got sort of you would almost call this the conspiracy layer, but conspiracy, what I would say about this is conspiracy theorists have been proven right about so many things over the past 5 years that it's almost hard to say, oh, it's really hard to poo-poo that anymore. You actually have to look at it and go, okay, so what here can we actually talk about that might be true? What here can we talk about that's total speculation? And what's just total WAG, wild freaking guessing? And so that's like, what would we say? What is this Israel Palestine conflict a symptom of? There's this sort of conspiracy theory that Jewish bankers are behind so many of the wars. What's their objective now? That's like a conspiracy level analysis, and I don't subscribe to that. I think that the speculation there tends to get into things that are really dangerous for, not because not because I care about getting canceled, because I don't care. And actually that's something else we ought to hit on here. I don't care what platform I get kicked off of. I will always say what I think needs to be said. So in this case, what I'm talking about being dangerous is just that when we start engaging with these theories about how the Jews did this and the Jews did that, we start getting into dangerous territory, because there's so much hatred of the Jews for reasons that are based on the sort of that bottom level, which is a spiritual level, a spiritual analysis of what's going on.
So yes, what the topic of the Gaza Israeli verbiage. It's really unfortunate that you could say that Hamas Israel is a fair conflict, if you will, whereas Israeli or Jewish Palestine is not. As I understand it, Palestine is a piece of dirt. It's not even an ethnicity. As far as I understand, Palestine's a place.
Right. Well, Palestine historically was just what the British called Israel, right? That's all it was. It was just the piece of ground that they called Israel. And the only people who lived there when Israel was created in the 1940s, the ground was basically a patch of freaking wasteland, because it had gone totally to crap. There were a few scattered tribes. So there's no ethnicity.
But
go ahead.
For the conversation, the way that we use the word Jew, whether it's a religious affiliation, an ethnic affiliation, or now a geographic affiliation, that's not, it's hard to say which one is being used in a particular sentence without context.
Yeah.
So don't think a Jewish conspiracy is saying all Jews. There could very well be a Zionist group is a named group of a specific group of Jews.
Right. Well, or even there's this thing that I don't remember where it is in the Bible, but it talks about the synagogue of Satan. I think that it's actually spoken of in Revelation, the synagogue of Satan. And the synagogue of Satan would be Jews or people who are pretending to be Jews, who aren't really Jews, or who are actually actively aligned with the powers of darkness that rule over this world. And people use the Jews to refer to that group as well. And so it's just totally unfair, and it's not a good not a good way to analyze that situation. But the overall point was just that the level of analysis that we're dealing with is one that mainstream conversation tends to avoid, because it touches on topics that are too icky or too too unproven for most people to want to talk about. Does that make sense?
Indeed.
Okay. So then that leads us to the final level of analysis, which would be like the lowest level that I know how to get at, which is sort of a spiritual level. And this is actually something that a lot of Christians aren't very comfortable talking about. The fact that there are real malevolent forces at work in the world that are manipulating events, that are, well, just for example, when Jesus, in the Gospels, we read Satan offered Jesus ownership of all the kingdoms of the world. He offered to give them to him. Well, that implies that Satan owns the kingdoms of this world. And if you can't get there, then you're missing probably the most important layer of understanding for what's going on in the world. You're just not going to get it. And most people just don't get it. And most people aren't comfortable if they do start to get it. And part of that's because, to a degree, we can only speculate, but when we're aware of what's going on at that level, we can really understand things. We can see things a lot clearer. Wouldn't you say?
It seems to be. I certainly operate from a place of guaranteeing that I don't have the answers. I'm not 100% right. So that's just my personality.
No, you're right.
But it's undeniable. You see it all around you.
Yeah. We do.
So in my description, I would never say that I see or I think, but I see.
Yeah. Well, and I agree. To be fair, I tend to come across really forcefully, and I have really strong opinions, but the reality is I'm with you. I don't hold my own opinion as being... I don't hold it too strongly. There's one thing I have faith in, and that's Jesus Christ. And there are a set of things that I'm convinced of by which I live my life. But most of what I do, most of what I talk about is just sort of an analysis of what's going on in the world that's kind of fluid. It kind of varies, and I don't, it's like trying to point out the pieces on the game board. But as you said, I don't hold to any super strong opinion, and I try not to be too dogmatic about most things.
Indeed. Yeah, you certainly have to be ready to listen.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, along those lines, while we're on the subject, do you have anything else that you're wanting to say about this conflict in the Israel area, since we're sort of on the topic and using it as an example?
Oh, it's a mess. I would just make sure that if anybody hears this and I can influence them to make sure that they do separate out the difference between the terrorists and the people living on the land, give people a chance to stand up and say, I'm not one of the bombers. I'm not one of them. They stand up and say that and live that way. Let them live.
Right. No, I'm with you. And, when this whole thing went down, I actually prayed with my wife, and what I prayed for was all the people who don't have a choice and don't have a chance. And what I mean by that is, it's easy to say civilians, but the line between a civilian and a combatant is pretty thin over there, and it moves. So what I would say is the people who really concern me are the people who do not have a choice about where they live and do not have a chance to get away, and they're going to get hurt. And I still pray for those people because I could totally see myself in that situation, I don't have any desire to hurt anybody. I don't have any desire to kill anybody, but God knows if I were over there and I were living in Gaza, I'd probably be getting hurt right now because, how many poor people live there, and how badly does the world treat them? And it's in war, it's always the weak and the old and the pregnant and women who suffer, and it's hell. And I don't have anything good to say about that,
There's nothing good to say about that.
Heavy subject. What do you think though of that concept of analyzing things on those four layers? Because we talked about doing this podcast, and over the past few days I've been thinking about it a little bit, and I went, you almost need a way to organize your analysis of a situation. So if you talk about things in layers, it sort of helps to make things more understandable.
It does. On a spiritual layer.
Yeah.
It does feel like things were going a little too smoothly in the area, and the enemy decided to kick up some dirt to disturb the peace.
Well,
Everyone,
you know,
everyone wanted to get along.
you know, what I would say is this goes back to a couple of different things in the Bible, as far as I can see. You've got number one, that the nations surrounding Israel come from the bloodline of Abraham, as does Israel. So you've got Abraham and Hagar had Ishmael, and Abraham and Sarah had Isaac. And Isaac was the forefather of Israel, and Ishmael, God said that from his blood would come many people and many princes, and that God would make great nations out of him too. And guess what? We see it. That's the people around Israel. But there's always been this sort of
It's an
enmity,
interesting thing. If
enmity
you
between them. Go ahead.
it's an interesting thing in the word. Post tribulation, after everything's said and done, Jesus will rule the nations, not destroy them.
Right. And it will be plural. It'll be the nations, not a nation, not a one world nation. It'll be the nations. He will rule the nations. That is a very interesting point, and you're absolutely right. And then,
Right?
anyway, do you mind if I go hit the other thing real quick?
Please.
Okay. So the other thing in Scripture is we know that powers and principalities are what we wrestle with, that there are spiritual forces in high places, that a lot of the physical conflict, a lot of the physical things going on in this world are influenced by and even a result of those spiritual causes. And it's really hard to separate them. Even when you have some experience with those situations, understanding how all that interplays is kind of a complicated topic, and it's probably its own subject for another podcast. But the point is,
Indeed.
the point is though that in this case, in the case of Israel and the surrounding nations, we have princes, spiritual princes, that are in control of the territory of some of those nations that have their own sort of agenda, and they do things their own way. You look at how Jordan responds to something versus how Lebanon responds to something versus how Israel does. Even though the people over there are all come from the same stock, there are powers over those areas that sort of determine what goes on in those places. So that we know that from Scripture. That's pretty clear, both from Daniel and from we see in Daniel how he was told by the angel who visited him that he had to battle with the prince of Persia for a certain amount of time before he was even able to come to carry a message to Daniel. And we know from Paul, I think it's in Ephesians, he says that we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with powers and principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. So we see those things coming down in a real, tangible way over there.
Indeed. Indeed. It is something that I've noticed watching the politics of the area. I've delved into some of the history just recently, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we tend to look at things as Americans is a bit of a we have a problem with the Republicans or we have a problem with the Democrats. It's all a separation of the people and the government, right? The government can do something bad, but the people aren't to blame, right? So you may have a terrible leader, pick your terrible leader, uh, and as Americans, we don't lay the blame on the feet of the people that are just going about their business because we wouldn't assume that the people are making those decisions. Whereas looking at the history where some of the leaders have made decisions that were in alignment with the word, the populace has exploded into revolt.
Yep, that's right. Well, and you know, That's actually sort of a third rail topic in a lot of ways, because people don't want to look at the people of a country as being evil, and if they do see them as evil, then they just want to kill them all. And
I still don't see them as evil. I
well,
see
I
them as
go ahead, go ahead.
not having access.
And I see them as evil. I see us as evil. I see all people as evil, because we all have, this is something that I've pondered on for a very long time, and I'm sure you have too, is there is no good thing inside of us. We are all pretty evil. And so when you look at all the people in the world, you go, yeah, those people are evil, and they're showing their evil in a way that is not the same as what I would, but, where I might, oh gosh, I might go hurt somebody, cheat somebody, steal something, cheat on my wife, whatever. The evil things that we all do as a more normal thing here in America aren't the same evil things that they're used to in those cultures. Their evil kind of finds its way out in a different form, but they're still human beings, and we can still empathize and sympathize with them. They're just people.
It's a fact. It's a fact.
So, what more did you want to hit here, or you want to put a button in this here soon? What do you think?
Oh, I think for episode 1, this is a fine button. Certainly come and see us at e6universe.com.
Yep.
Use
I'll put a link in the
Israel.
description or whatever.
Absolutely. We'll send you a copy to check out. We'd love to hear from you and what you think of the story.
Absolutely. Thanks, Greg. And yeah, don't forget promo code Israel. That's e6universe.com, promo code Israel. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, guys. We'll catch you again.